بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه يكافئ مزيدا يا ربنا لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك ولعظيم سلطانك سبحانك لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك فلك الحمد حتى ترضى ولك الحمد إذا رضيت ولك الحمد بعد الرضا اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الأولين وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الآخرين وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في كل وقت وحين وصلي وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين وصلي وسلم على سيدنا محمد حتى ترث الأرض ومن عليها أنت خير الوارثين ونويت تعلم وتعليم وتذكر وتذكير نفع انتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على تمسك بكتاب الله وبسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم ودعاء إلى الهدى ودلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. قال محمد بن إسماعيل البخاري رحمه الله تعالى في كتاب الإيمان باب الحياء من الإيمان وبه إليه قال حدثنا عبد الله بن يوسف قال أخبرنا مالك بن أنس رضي الله تعالى عنه عن ابن شهاب عن سالم بن عبد الله عن أبيه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم مر على رجل من الأنصار وهو يعظ أخاه في الحياء فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم دعه فإن الحياء من الإيمان.
Modesty is from faith. Abdullah ibn Yusuf related to us saying Malik informed us on the authority of Ibn Shihab, on the authority of Salim ibn Abdullah, on the authority of his father, that the Messenger of God sallallahu alaihi wasallam, may the prayers and peace of God be upon him, passed by a man from the helpers who was preaching to his brother about modesty. So the Messenger of God sallallahu alaihi wasallam, may the prayers and peace of God be upon him, said, let him be, as verily modesty is from faith.
Bab al-Haya min al-Iman, the chapter of modesty being of faith, and statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Imam Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala employs as the title of the chapter related on the authority of Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Umar anhu in the transmission, Salim ibn Abdullah ibn Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu Sayyidina Salim ibn Abdullah of the Fuqaha of Medina, the grade 7, the grade 8 of Medina to Munawwara, at the highest degree in terms of religiosity. Likewise his father, Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Umar, likewise his father, Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu who was inside of the previous tradition. They used to say that nobody really resembled Umar ibn Khattab like his son Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu. And they would say nobody resembled Abdullah ibn Umar like his son Salim ibn Abdullah radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda. MashaAllah, tabarakallah. The tradition is about haya. And Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala is already made several references inside of the book of faith of the importance of modesty being of faith. We looked at the tradition that the Prophet ﷺ, when he spoke about the branches of faith has 60 odd branches, the version Imam Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala brought, and modesty is of faith. Modesty is of faith. And then likewise also we looked inside of the previous tradition, likewise, before somebody enters into paradise, about the river that is just prior to paradise, and of the opinions like Imam Malik, Shaykh radiallahu anhu warda, is it called the river of haya, modesty. And we mentioned that there are three terms that are very, very similar. One is haya, another is haya, hamza, and the other is haya, tal marbuta. Three different significations, although no doubt they're interconnected. Haya, the qasr, without the hamza, without the med, that is matar, rain. It signifies rain in the Arabic language. Haya with the hamza is what we have in front of us here, modesty. It's indicative of modesty. And then haya with the ta'al marbuta is what is life, and they're all interconnected, as we made mention of before. Yani matar, symbolism of matar is rain. Yani the Prophet ﷺ, when is the symbolism of matar, rain, is rahm, is mercy, as it descends from the heavens. And so whenever the Prophet ﷺ saw rain descend from the heavens, the Prophet would expose some of his skin, ﷺ, and so the rain could touch him physically, because it's rahmatullah, it's the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala descending from the heavens, by virtue of which life is given. And then likewise also haya with the hamza and haya, and we said they are interconnected. in that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is going to say al-haya, haya, that haya, modesty is haya, is life. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, no doubt that this attribute has central importance in the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We mentioned the tradition that is related inside of the Sunnah of Tirmidhi, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, لِكُلِّ دِينٍ خُلُقٍ, that every religion, every manifestation of the eternal religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or likewise any quote-unquote religion or way that contradicts the eternal way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has a khuluq, it has a distinct insignia, a distinct trait. He said sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, وَخُلُقَ الْإِسْلَامِ الْحَيَاء, and what the distinct trait of Islam is haya, is modesty. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and that is on the continuum of the Prophets themselves. The tradition of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, it's related inside of Sahih al-Bukhari, مِمَّا أَدْرَكَ النَّاسِ مِن نُبُوَّةِ الْأُولَى إِذَا لَمْ تَسْتَحِي فَاصْنَعْ مَا شِئْتَ, of that which people have attained from first prophecy. And so the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, indicating a trait that is consistent inside of the continuum of the Prophets themselves. مما أدرك الناس من نبوة الأولى إذا لم تستحي فاصنع ما شئت. The Prophet ﷺ said, if you have no shame, then do as you wish. We mentioned that tradition, which is عظيم جدا, a great tradition. The Prophet ﷺ, and likewise as we refer to, it's symphonic in terms of its meaning. There's multiple meanings. He's speaking to very different and disparate people inside of one tradition, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. But we made reference to that tradition, that is a tradition that transformed the great Abdullah ibn Maslam al-Qa'nabi, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, upon hearing that tradition from the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam for the first time, he transformed himself and he cleaned up his house, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, until he becomes from the most important imams and teachers of the great Imam al-Bukhari, radiallahu ta'ala anhu wa ardahu himself. And so haya is of faith. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam said, in haya there are going to be two significations, and we looked at this in the beginning, significations, the different linguistic signification as well as a religious or a legal signification. And as for the linguistic signification, then haya is like what they call taghayyur or inkisar. It's about when some type of change, usually what we term an emotional change, when there's an emotional change that leads to a type of brokenness. It occurs inside of the human being, يَعْتَرِي الْإِنسان, that what affects the human being. That's due to the human being leaving something, i.e. not doing something, or the human being doing something, yu'ab, that is considered to be blameworthy, language, culturally. And so a person can be modest, we can more so apply in this context, the linguistic context, the term shame. So a human being can be shamed whenever they do something or don't do something that in their own cultural context is considered to be blameworthy. And so that which affects the heart, that is known in the Arabic language as haya, there, okay? That there, from a perspective, is not what is the murad. It's not what's intended here by the usage of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wa sallam. Because linguistically, when we speak about blame, it is after the fact. Okay, you do an act, and by doing an act or not doing an act, something occurs inside of your heart and soul. It breaks you. That it's blame. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is not speaking about something that is after the act. He's speaking about something, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that's of faith before the act, and it's preventative in nature. It either drives you to do good. Okay, irtikab ma huwa al-hasan. It either drives you, it's your motivating factor for doing good, or likewise, it's a motivating factor li-ijtinab al-qabih, to prevent you from doing something wrong, or likewise also, it's a motivating factor for you to sort of to step up, quote unquote, due to the fact that you perceive there's some type of deficiency in your conduct with the one who has rights over you. Your ulama, this is legally or religiously, three spheres that we're speaking about. And so when we talk about haya, from the perspective of the law in and of itself, you're speaking about something that motivates you to prevent you from doing something untoward, or it motivates you to do something that is what considered to be good, or it motivates you to try to increase in what? In the acts that you do, due to the fact that you feel that you're deficient in the rights of somebody who has a right over you, okay? You often hear inside of what? In anthropology, they will speak about shame cultures, blame cultures, okay? Both terms are haya. I said a blame culture, this is haya linguistically, whereas a shame culture, this is haya religiously. Blame. Like we spoke about the different degrees of soul, we refer to it. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about nafs al-lawwama. Allah ta'ala speaks about La uqsimu bi yawm al-qiyamah wa la uqsimu bin nafs al-lawwama. Allah ta'ala, He is swearing by the nafs that is al-lawwama. And the nafs al-lawwama is like the nafs that has a type of shame in it, hayat linguistically here, meaning blame. I alone, that when you do an act, there's a nafs, which we can call in English language your conscience. There's a conscience in the human being that says you shouldn't have did what you have just did. And the slave here has to listen to that voice, because listening to that voice, the voice of blame, it rears the higher voice, which is the voice of shame. And that's how you understand the tradition of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, aforementioned, that all the prophets came with, and that people are in the age of the Prophet sallallahu adrak an-nas. The Prophet sallallahu said we could see the baqaya of that, the remnants of that in the people of the age of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's of those things that remain from the prophets. The Prophet sallallahu referring to إِذَا لَمْ تَسْتَحِي فَاصْنَعْ مَا شِئْتَ. And if you have no haya, then do as you want, the Prophet ﷺ said. Who is the Prophet ﷺ speaking to? First and foremost, the Prophet ﷺ is speaking to the one who lacks haya. إِذَا لَمْ تَسْتَحِي فَاصْنَعْ مَا شِئْتَ. The Prophet ﷺ is saying here, if a person lacks haya, lacks modesty, then they will do whatever they want. There are no reins to rein them in. Nothing can rein them in, okay? Remember, we are about ordinance that have been established a lot by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As the Prophet ﷺ said, وَحَدَّ حُدُودَ فَلَا تَعْتَدُوهَا. That Allah ta'ala has established ordinance and we should not transgress those ordinances. Well, what allows us, the mechanism inside of the believer that prevents the believer from going beyond those boundaries that Allah ta'ala has established, is the mechanism of haya, is the mechanism of shame there. You don't want to be shamed in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You want to be shamed, as the Prophet ﷺ said, Amam ru'us al-khalaiq, where Allah ta'ala will bring you in front of the entire creation, subhanahu, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will manifest those deeds you have. Those deeds that are considered blameworthy by Allah ta'ala and the Rasul ﷺ. You don't want to be shamed by the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. And so that shame as a khuluq, it drives you. But somebody who lacks shame, lacks haya, فَاصْنَعْ مَا شِئْتَ. The Prophet ﷺ said, here it's an amar, but the ma'na here, the meaning here is khabariyah. The Prophet says, do whatever you want, meaning you will do whatever you want. They will do whatever they want. The Prophet ﷺ is saying, that is a bad sign. The Prophet ﷺ, and when somebody lacks shame, the Prophet ﷺ, he said that إِذَا أَرَادَ اللَّهُ أَن يُهْلِكَ عَبْدًا. If Allah Ta'ala wants to destroy a person, إِذَا أَرَادَ اللَّهُ يُهْلِكَ قَوْمًا, in a riwayah, if Allah Ta'ala wants to destroy a people, نَزَعَ مِنْ قُلُوبِهِمُ الْحَيَاةِ. That Allah Ta'ala will wrench from their heart haya. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And so when haya comes out of the heart, then there's signs. How do we know that Allah Ta'ala taken haya from our heart? That the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, talqahu, you'll meet such a person who Allah Ta'ala has taken haya out of his heart, baghidan mubaghida. That he'll be somebody who's like, they've always got a problem with people. And they're always bringing about environments where people have problems. That sifa there is a sifa that somebody lacks haya. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, when there's such, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now strips from them the amana, that they'll no longer have an amana, they'll not be trustworthy. And the Prophet ﷺ said in another riwayah that they will not only just not be trustworthy, whenever you meet them, you'll find that they're treacherous and they bequeath treachery. The Prophet ﷺ says. And when they're like that, then Allah ta'ala rips from their heart rahmah. How we see the connection between haya bil qasr and haya bil hamz bil med, that Allah Ta'ala will strip from their heart rahmah. Look at the Rasul sallallahu. After that khalas, it's over. Like the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Aqra' ibn Habis hada, what can I do for the person who Allah Ta'ala stripped rahmah from his heart? What can I do when Allah Ta'ala has taken rahmah out of the heart of a person? Hakata the Prophet ﷺ said, وَهُوَ رَحْمَةَ الْعَالَمِينَ, and he is rahmat al-alamin. And so the Prophet continued, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala strips rahmah from them, then he will strip, in a riwayah, ribqat al-Islam. That the next brace, the reality of Islam, is stripped from them. Another riwayah, ribqat al-iman, faith stripped from them. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, and nas'allahu salam wa afiyah. All of this, the chain of effects, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, bi iradatihi subhanahu, by virtue of his will, of virtue of his intent subhanahu wa ta'ala, he stripped you of that great quality that is known as haya. And that's why it becomes maqsad al-deen, it becomes the maqsad of the religion in and of itself, to attain this great quality of haya. Like Imam Muhammad al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala, in his Ihya' al-Ulum, inside of Asrar al-Salah, inside of the secrets of prayer, he said the reason you pray in front of Allah ta'ala is to achieve haya. You speak about degrees, 7 different degrees. Al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala speaks about that the one inside of salah must wayfare to in order to get to an ultimate objective when they stand in prayer before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Al-Ghazali says that ultimate objective is haya. That's like the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, as it relates to the conversation of prayer, in his conversation with Sayyidina Musa ibn Imran, Sa'altu Rabbi hatta istahyaytu, that I asked my Lord until I was just too shy, shamed in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And from that, what Ghazali understands, there's a sir, there's a connection between the statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam there and that which he was asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala over, which was prayer. And we want to become people who have haya in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It connects back to our original conversation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Sahih Muslim, in Allah ta'ala jameel, yuhibbu al-jamal. Verily Allah ta'ala is beautiful and he loves beauty. And then we understand the mu'min. And we want to be mu'min because Allah huwal mu'min subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're trying to inculcate inside of ourselves the attributes of the Rabb subhanahu wa ta'ala. We understand the principle, and that's why the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Tirmidhi, he said, Inna Allah ta'ala hayyi yuhibbul haya. Verily Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is hayyi, dhul haya subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he loves haya. God is modest and he loves modesty subhanahu wa ta'ala, as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. And so your interest in standing in front of the Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala is that you have the attributes of the Lord, and that attribute, that great quality that the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wa sallam samma al-haya. The second meaning you understand of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wa sallam, idha lam tastahi fasna' ma shi'ta, is that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is now not speaking to somebody bereft of haya, but he's speaking to somebody characterized, qualified by haya. Have you got the point? إِذَا لَمْ تَسْتَحِ, the person who has haya, they have what? Shame. And when they come under, they're confronted with an act, if they feel no haya, they feel no shame, go ahead, فَاصْنَعْ مَا شِئْتَ, do whatever you want. The mechanism of haya that is always going to prevent you from doing something that is untoward. And so when people have haya, that mechanism in and of itself, it helps them determine what acts are warranted by the Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala and what acts are not. We're not ordinarily speaking within the realm of the law, because the law clarifies that. But beyond that, as we learned in the tradition of saying Wabis ibn Ma'bad, istafti qalbak, ask your heart. What are you asking your heart for? Are you feeling shamed or not of the act that is in front of you here? So when you're a person, mashallah ta'ala, who inculcated inside of themselves this great attribute that we'll see amongst the Sahaba, radiallahu anhum warḍah, the greatest quality that they have is the quality of haya. And the one who has what? The greatest in that regard, Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan ibn al-As, radiallahu ta'ala anhu warḍah, al-Umawi, radiallahu ibn Umayyah ibn Abd al-Shams, radiallahu anhu warḍah, Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan. That's why the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the presence of Uthman, it invokes the haya of Abdul Hayy, of the Hayy sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. It invokes it, that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam will be shy in front of Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan. And then when they asked, Ya Rasulullah, lima, should I not be shy, have haya in front of one who the angels themselves have haya in front of? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that the angels, that they're modest in front of Uthman ibn Affan. The presence of Uthman ibn Affan, it evokes that great quality in the malakut, and it evokes that great quality in Sahib al-Nubuwah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that's why you see multiple traditions that will refer to it, mashallah, tabarakallah. The women of Medina to Munawwara, radiallahu anhum wardahum. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, hadith of Sayyidina Aisha, inside of Sahih al-Bukhari, the Prophet, ni'man nisa al-Ansar. The Prophet ﷺ said, how blessed are the women of the Ansar. لا يمنعهن الحياء أن يتفقهن في الدين. They don't allow their modesty, and they have a great amount of it, to prevent them from learning the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hakadha the Prophet ﷺ said. But first and foremost, before we speak about the women of the Ansar being faqihat, being women of sort of great knowledge inside of the religion, inside of the law, we've got to speak about the quality of haya that the Prophet first and foremost attributed to them. They don't allow the haya that they have to prevent them from learning the religion. Like Sayyidina Mujahid, the student of Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Abbas, where he says, Ithnan, la yata'allaman. There are two types of people who don't learn, Sayyidina Mujahid said. He said, al-mustahi, okay, well, mutakabbir. He said the mustahiyya, somebody, it's not haya, haqiqatan. It's the illusion of haya. They have this illusion of modesty. Okay, so the one who has the illusion of modesty, they will not learn. And then the arrogant one, Sayyidina Mujahid says they will not learn. Why? Because the one who has the illusion of modesty, it will prevent him from learning. He will be too ashamed to ask a question. You get the point? Like too ashamed. You see, mashallah, those people who understand the degree of knowledge with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, never, the faqir always remembers, one time we were in the deserts in Mauritania there, we were studying the Al-Fiqh with Marabt al-Hajj, and so we used to be there in the Durus, with Sayyidina Marabt al-Hajj, mashallah, tabarakallah, and there used to be this student, and this used to be there, and often he'd be like before the faqir, taking his turn in the Darus, and he was studying the Ajurumiyah, the Ajurumiyah of Ibn Ajurun, so he stood in the Ajurumiyah, and so like he'd be asking Marabt al-Hajj questions. And here's the faqih, this is how you learn about religion. Here's the faqih, listen to the questions he's asking Marabt al-Hajj. And the faqih is like, my man should feel ashamed asking that type of question there, because he was asking Allah Ta'ala, Allah, we all have our own experiences, isn't it? I've never heard a person ask more stupid questions than this individual. His questions were in the book of stupidity, straight out of the book of stupidity. And so the faqih was like, hey, my man asking that type of question. So I'm putting it down to maybe the man slow, or maybe hakada. But khalas, hakada he was. Then khalas didn't see him for a while. Now one time we were leaving the desert, we were going to another part of the desert to see Marab Muhammad Zainab. We're going to see one of the great imams, Sahib al-Zuhd, in the midst of the desert. And so when I'm leaving, I see this student who I hadn't seen for a while. And so he says, Shof, I said to him, mashallah, kaif, and I haven't seen you for a while, what are you doing now? He said, I've reached the Alfiya now, I'm studying the Alfiya now. I'm like, oh yeah, you reckon? Everybody like, you reckon you study the Alfiya? I'm like, subhanallah. And he said, inshallah, when you get back, we'll revise together. I said, marhaba. And we'll revise together. So Khalas went, returned back. And so thereby, Khalas, he was true to his wa'ad. He came, and he's in the tent of the faqir, and we're sitting studying. My man, mashallah, he was like Sibawayh the second. I'm like, how on earth did that happen? How did he come from the book of stupidity? You get the point? To like, mashallah, tabarakallah, like Allah Ta'ala opened his mind. And that day you begin to reflect upon a cave that what? لا يمنعهن الحياء من التفقه في الدين. He didn't allow whatever shame that he had, and he must have had it, he didn't allow it to prevent him from learning the religion, even if it meant asking the most, quote unquote, in the faqih's estimation, which can be a wrong estimation, but it was the faqih's estimation altogether, even if it meant asking the most stupid questions. Hakada Sayyidina Mujahid, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, warda says, doesn't matter if the questions are embarrassing, doesn't matter. Look at the tradition of Sayyidina Salama, tradition of Sayyidina Aisha, radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, two of the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When they speak of the great Ansariya, Najariya, Sayyidina Sulaim, Rumaysa, radiallahu anha, وأرضاها. when she comes to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she's asking the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam about women having like wet dreams. She's asking the Prophet about women having wet dreams. That if a woman has a wet dream, does she have to make ghusl? She's saying to the Prophet ﷺ, the riwayat of Salama, the riwayat of Salama, where she says that to the Prophet ﷺ, Salama covers her face, she's like, oh my God, shame, how is she asking the Rasul ﷺ that? In another riwayat, she says, فَضَحْتِ عَنِ النِّسَاءِ, that you've exposed women right there by saying that. That women, here because obviously the nature of it is women having sexual dreams and what have you, and that sexual dreams emerging from the dream state to the physics in and of itself. And then the Prophet ﷺ simply said, Na'am, إِذَا رَأَتِ الْمَاءِ. Yeah, khalas. If she sees sperm, she has to go and make ghusl. The Prophet ﷺ said, obviously the fuqaha get into kalam upon that, the Shafi'i fuqaha get into kalam upon that a woman, just like a man, can have sperm, هكذا the fuqaha can tell us, or at least some of the fuqaha رضي عنهم وارضاهم. But هكذا she didn't, Sulaim, the great woman, didn't allow her haya and what? For her to learn the religion. And how many since the great woman Sulaim radiallahu anha warda, on the basis of that, have learned and something about issues of tahara, etc. Like the other great women, in Asma bint Yazid radiallahu ta'ala anha warda al-Ash'aliyya from Banu Ash'al, and Sariya radiallahu anha warda, the cousin of the great faqih of the Sahaba, Sayyidina Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiallahu anha warda. This woman, mashallah tabarakallah, min afqa nisa'i fil Medina, of the most knowledgeable and skilled in jurisprudence of the women of Medina to Munawwara, of the Ansariyat in and of themselves, radiallahu anha wa ardaha. She's the one, often when you hear a woman will ask difficult questions, it's her in Asma bint Yazid. She becomes Za'imatun Nisa. She becomes the one, she's like the spokeswoman for the women of Medina to Munawwara. So all of the things that maybe the women don't want to ask for whatever reason, it's saying Asma bint Yazid radiallahu ta'ala anha wardaha, towering woman, it's a towering in knowledge of the highest caliber, like Sayyidina Aisha, towering in even issues of war, radiallahu ta'ala anha, of those who take the bay'at al-Ridwan with the Prophet sallallahu Asma bint Yazid, radiallahu anha, and fulfills it. Yom Yarmouk, the day of Yarmouk, when Sayyidina Khalid Walid, etc., Ka'ib ibn Amr, when they engage Rome, and he's saying that to whom? Saying that to Asma bint Yazid, radiallahu anha, wardaha, what do you call it? The central pole of a tent. I don't know, a lot of the women of Medina, that was one of their secret weapons. The pole of a tent, what holds up a tent, they just start taking that with that central pole. The tradition of saying that to this one. Of saying it to Nasiba, bint Amr, saying it to Nasiba, that's what Bay'at al-Ridwan. She says she sees the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam saying it to Nasiba, and he's sitting cross-legged. The Prophet is sitting cross-legged, and the news comes to the Prophet and she says she's cutting stuff, making food, and for the army. This is at Hudaybiyah. And then she says, news comes to the Prophet ﷺ, the disinformation that the Hayy, Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan, has been killed by Quraysh. And news reaching disinformation, as you call it now, fake news, has reached the Prophet ﷺ that he's been killed, Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan. And the Prophet ﷺ said, if they've killed Uthman, I will reap havoc upon them. I will destroy them if they have killed Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan. In that blood, mutahhar Sayyidina Uthman, wallah amdul nurayn. And so Sayyidina Nasiba, she says, when she hears the Prophet say that, she says, you see the knife she's cutting the food with? She puts it into a midriff, to about there, to any top. She puts it there. And she ready, she ready. Then the tent, she goes in the tent, a pole, she just rips out the pole, she's on. And everyone's meeting beneath the acacia right there to take bay'ah with the Prophet ﷺ, and Nasiba takes bay'ah. Saying Asma bint Yazid Yawm Yarmouk, she grabbed the pole as well. And it said she killed 9 Roman soldiers with the pole of a tent. Killed 9 of them. I know none of us could do that. None of us with a pole. Even if it was a rumh with a spear, we'd be struggling. One of us, we just throw it and run in it, just hoping for the best. She killed 9 people with a pole. Radiallahu ta'ala anhu, of the most accomplished of the sahabiyat. Radiallahu anha warda. But you ordinarily hear about her within the context of knowledge. radiallahu ta'ala anha warda'a, and they're standing in front of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She would ask questions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said, have you ever heard a person ask questions like this? As great as the question Asma bint Yazid asked, radiallahu anha warda'a. She's the one who asked the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the women, like, look at the men. The men have the jama' with the Rasul, the men have jama'ah with the Rasul. She's saying to the Prophet himself, we're leaving women here. She's saying the men, she said, and most of all, Ya Rasulullah, she said, men can go to jihad with you. She said, most of all. She's speaking about how come the men get all of this and the women don't get anything? Enough. And so what the Prophet gives, saying Asma bint Yazid and the women of Medina, he gives them an entire day for themselves, which is Thursday, Yawmul Khamis. Yawmul Khamis is Women's Day for the Rasul sallallahu inside the Medina Munawwara, where they can sit with the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. And that day, so we understand that we refer to, that's still part of the continuum. Because in Jahiliyyah, in Hadith al-Bukhari, Women's Day in Mecca used to be a Thursday. Women used to get the Kaaba upon a Thursday. It was exclusively for women. And so the Prophet ﷺ took that same blessed day, the day where actions are shown to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the Prophet ﷺ gave it to the women of Madinatul Munawwara, mashallah, tabarakallah. And so in this tradition, the Prophet ﷺ, and he thought to say Abdullah ibn Umar, marra ala rajul min al-ansar, that the Prophet ﷺ, he walks past a man from amongst the Ansar of Medina. وَهُوَ يَعِذْ أَخَاهُ فِي الْحَيَاةِ. And here is what is admonishing his brother with regards to the haya, the modesty that his brother displays. And so in other riwayats, that the brother here, he's so modest that a lot of his rights, he will forgo them. He'll just forgo his rights because of his modesty. And so his brother sees that as a weakness, yani. You get the point? And often it's like kindness can be a weakness. Yeah, and he sees that the modesty of his own brother is a weakness. So he's admonishing him. He's taking him to task. Another riwayah, yu'atibu. And he's finding fault in him for his modesty. And so the Prophet ﷺ says, da'hu. Leave him alone. The Prophet ﷺ says, فَإِنَّ الْحَيَاءَ مِنَ الْإِيمَانِ. Because verily modesty is from faith. Modesty is from faith. And you see, they take it from what the source of modesty, which is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Like you see in the narrative of Surah Al-Ahzab, in the marriage of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Sayyidah Zainab bin Jahash, radiallahu ta'ala anha wardaha. When Sayyidah Zainab bin Jahash radiallahu anha married the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it's the walima. And then the Prophet, hadith related by Sayyidina Anas, radiallahu anhu wardaha, ibn Malik, radiallahu anhu wardaha. And so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam sends Sayyidina Anas, radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda, who's young, he's really young. Riwayah is like around 10 years, it's the very beginning of Medina. Riwayah that he himself says he's around 10 years of age, Sayyidina Anas, anhu. So the Prophet sends Sayyidina Anas to invite people for the walima. And so Sayyidina Anas says he will go out in the Medina to Munawwara and say there's a walima in the Prophet ***'s house. Look how it is, still qa'im. The walima's qa'im, and then the Prophet sends Anas, go and bring people for the walima. It's not like the nice cards, isn't it? All the cards, like 1 month in advance or whatever it is. And it's just kind of organic, natural. So Sayyidina Anas will go start bringing people to the house of the Prophet ﷺ, and they thereby eat. They eat in a riwayah, they eat meat, they eat sawiq, which is like a barley soup. Okay, that's how the Prophet ﷺ says. And then those group leave, and then Anas brings a new group. And then that group leave, then Anas brings a new group. Okay, until Anas says he returned to the Prophet ﷺ, and he says, Ya Rasulullah, I can't find anybody else, yani. There's nobody else I can find to bring. Okay, and so he finds that the Prophet ﷺ is standing there, ﷺ, and saying that Zainab bin Jahash is inside the corner. Saying that Zainab bin Jahash is inside the corner. It's his wedding night of the Prophet ﷺ, but there's 3 men who just remain there, just chatting away. They've eaten their food and just remain, just hanging out, lads. In the corner, just hanging out in the house of the Rasul ﷺ with his wife on the wedding night. ﷺ. But the Prophet ﷺ is haya now. Okay, because this is the haqq of the Prophet ﷺ. We're trying to use the parallel. It's his right, but the Prophet ﷺ, due to modesty, he forgoes that right. Sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. So he doesn't say nothing, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And so then the Prophet exits the house, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Anas said, I go out with the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And his Prophet goes straight to the house of Aisha. And how can you see the beauty of this? The Prophet got a new wife, yani, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Saying Zainab bin Jahash. And then Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha wardaha says to the Prophet ﷺ after exchanging salams, Ya Rasulullah, how did you find your wife? How's your wife? And how is it? MashaAllah. And just like a really nice conversation about his new wife. ﷺ. And so then the Prophet leaves Sayyidah Aisha and he goes in Anas says to the houses of the rest of the women of his wives ﷺ, and all of them are asking the Prophet the same thing. How is it on your wedding night? Congratulating the Prophet. How did you find her, Ya Rasulullah? So the Prophet khalas hasn't been with her, yani. And the Prophet said, mashallah, mashallah. So the Prophet returns back to the house. And my men are still there, yani. They're still there chatting. In the house, look at Medina. Shuf, they're in the house of the Prophet ﷺ with the wife of the Rasul. So in the corner. Don't think that the Prophet ﷺ has like, some like whatever, 10-bedroom mansion. ﷺ. It is one room. They're in the room with the wife of the Prophet ﷺ. And so the Prophet, when he sees them, the Rasul ﷺ, kharaj, he goes out again. Again, look how his modesty. You want to speak? Let them speak. The Prophet ﷺ, once again he goes to the house of Aisha, Yadur bin Nisa, he goes around the house of the Nisa. Then the Prophet ﷺ, when he returns back, now they're getting up. So the Prophet meets them at the door and they sort of leave. And as I said, Anas is following the Prophet ﷺ everywhere. And so the Prophet steps in the house. And so Anas now with the Rasul, he's laying as a young lad. He goes to step into, he said the Prophet has sort of 1 foot in the house, 1 foot out of the house. He said, I go in to step with the Prophet ﷺ. Prophet knows, like you can see the scene, isn't it? He just takes the curtain. Sayyid Anas is outside, I get that. And then that's the reason for Ayatul Hijab now, the hijab are now being legislated in and of itself, on the riwayah that relates to Sayyidina Zainab bin Jahsh, or the riwayah to Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab that relates to Sayyidina Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha wardaha. But this is the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam's haya. So he's foregoing a right. And as Ansari understands that to forego a right. Al-haya min al-iman. Although Allah subhanahu inna Allah la yastahi min al-haq. Although Allah ta'ala reveals verily Allah ta'ala la yastahi. Allah ta'ala here has no shame, no haya as it relates to the truth. That those men, one time they should have got up. The Prophet Allah ta'ala is saying. But the difference the ulama say here is the haya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in relation to the rights of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Have you got the point? Haya is not sound if you're about foregoing the rights of somebody else. You get the point? Somebody else's rights. That taqsir, that deficiency that you have as it relates to the rights of somebody else, whether it's you delivering those rights or whether it's somebody else delivering those rights, it is not from haya for you to let that be. That's the illusion of modesty. The only time haya is mamduh, like in this case, if it relates to you foregoing your own rights. Now that is the reality of modesty in and of itself. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in this bab kathir. And the Prophet ﷺ, as Aisha radiallahu anha in the hadith of Bukhari, and she tells us about the Prophet ﷺ, ashadd al-haya. And haya, nobody had more modesty than the Prophet ﷺ. The parallel that was struck, that he had more modesty than a virgin woman in her inner quarters. Hakadha the hadith. Although the ulama understand by the ellipse here is that when, on a wedding night, when a man face enters upon her, the modesty that comes out of that virgin woman, the Prophet has more modesty than that. Sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi sallam. Alhamdulillah, al-haya min al-iman, inshallah, tabarakallah, the hadith. Do you have any questions, inshallah ta'ala? Any questions? Any questions, inshallah?
Sharon, how do you strike a balance between having haya and not having your rights trampled upon all the time, as opposed to, and then having no haya, like on the continuum?
Allah Ta'ala alam, the reality of the attributes that are the divine attributes and the prophetic attributes, you're not going to have those type of attributes such that people will able to be trampled all over you. You got the point? It's not going to be there. Remember, haya is not an attribute in and of itself. There are a plethora of attributes that we have to inculcate inside of ourselves. And so it's our other attributes that would prevent anybody, quote unquote, taking advantage of you in that type of way. If that's your thing, yani. But often, as it relates to the issue of wilaya, then whatever. People want to take your rights every time, let it be, yani. But often, let it be. You understand? About their own rights in and of itself. It's like saying Abdullah ibn Umar, who relates to tradition here, and saying Abdullah ibn Umar, he used to have like a lot of slaves, and saying Abdullah ibn Umar ibn Khattab, whenever he saw one of his slaves pray, whenever he saw them pray, he'd free them immediately. Until obviously it became common knowledge amongst the slaves that if you just pray, yani, he will just free you. So they all just start praying, and Abdullah ibn Umar just starts freeing them. Yani. And so the Sahaba anhum said, Ya Abdullah ibn Umar, yani, they're tricking you. They're tricking you. Like they know that you free people who pray, yani, so they're just pretending to pray. And saying Abdullah ibn Umar said, whoever loves to cheat me, then I love to be cheated. Whatever, yani, araftum. You get the point. He's looking at the positive side of that quality of the emancipation of slaves based upon a sign, an outward sign of faith. And he draws closer to Allah Ta'ala on the basis of that. You know, point blank, Ahlullah, and Ahlullah. I don't know, I'm trying to think of another term. I'm trying to think of it. It's sort of more gentle term. I had a sort of ghetto term in my head, but I couldn't throw that one out. But Ahlullah, you don't cheat Ahlullah, they can't be cheated. You get the point? You there? Hayat, mashallah. Naam.
Sheikh, when you said rights of someone else, an illusion of modesty, you just lost me at that point.
Somebody could feel that they're modest, quote unquote, by not interfering when the rights of somebody else is being taken away. Because when your rights are being taken away, modesty can dictate that you let that go. That's what the Prophet is telling us here. If somebody's taking your rights away, the man of the Ansar, where he was foregoing his rights, are often. So here, his brothers take into account for that. And the Prophet said, no, that's a good trait. Modesty is from faith. The Prophet is saying. So we understand from that, by you letting your rights go, you foregoing your rights due to modesty, that is good. You understand? But you shouldn't make a parallel now by saying, by letting other people's rights go, when rights that are owed towards somebody else, whether it's you owing those rights or whether other people own those rights, by you not fulfilling those rights or not encouraging people to fulfill those rights, you could erroneously think that due to modesty, that is good. That's blameworthy, okay? That there is blameworthy in and of itself. Now,
men, when they enter heaven, they get women. What happens to women when they enter heaven?
What happens to women when they get into heaven? They get a man.
Any woman. It's not. Someone asked me the question today and I didn't have the answer.
No, the answer is they get a man, they get their husband.
They get the husband.
Yeah. Men and women are different. Women, men want women. Women want a man. Different. Allah Ta'ala created is different. So every single woman inside of Jannah will have a man. And it's a qaww we took from some of our shuyukh that a woman who doesn't have a man in the dunya, she'll have the Prophet ﷺ in the next world. She'll be of the wives of the Rasul ﷺ in the next world. They say. So but the key is that women and men are different. Now, students who've sat on the micro and did it several times. You could ask the brothers, do you want women, E-N, inside of what? Inside the Jannah? And the brother yeah. I get the brothers say. Then when you ask the sisters, do you want men, E-N? They want A-N. They want a man. Men different. Fitra يعني. عرفتم؟ وياك نعرفان. No, I'm asking you. No, I'm asking you. Not about the man, this other man who you pass by in the street. We're asking about you.
Men or women, that's natural. The person who asked me the question, he said to me that, my mother's going to go to heaven if she's a believer, and she's going to be with another man. And that was his, illusion of what's going to happen. He's there and he isn't there. He's like thinking, believes in Allah, but he doesn't.
No, a woman has a husband of the dunya.
Yeah.
So if, a woman who's married and a woman who's married, and she dies and he dies upon that, she dies upon that, the woman is going to be with a husband inside of Jannah. MashaAllah, tabarakallah. The issue is if she dies unmarried, due to divorce or that she's never been married in and of itself. then who will she be married to inside of paradise? Okay, in that she will be married. There's not going to be any single women. Yani. Is that what of the opinions there is that she's married to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Raftum. هكذا. That's why the context of that you understand the great woman, Sayyidah Rabi'at al-Adawiyya, yani, where she would not, mashallah, tabarakallah, she would not get married. Yani. She didn't get married. Even the great Imam Hassan al-Basri, rahimahullah ta'ala, proposed. Yani, she refused. The great Hassan al-Basri, rahimahullah ta'ala. She stayed single her entire life. She had one desire in the next world, mashallah, tabarakallah.
Sheikh, from yesterday, you said about paradise being in the position in the cosmos, and also hellfire in the earth, and also section in your heart. How does that? Can you expand upon that?
Yeah, getting more specific. What do?
So like sometimes you see people and they actually look like they live in hell. How does that relate then to say getting into paradise for that particular person? Is there any relation between the two?
Yeah, I'm not really understanding the question, to be honest.
So if you see somebody who seems to be like, live in hell in the heart in this world, will that relate to being in hellfire in the next world?
Yani, Allahu Alam, yani the issues of what relates to sort of hellfire in the next world is issues of faith ultimately, isn't it? Okay, so we also look at it from that perspective. Yani. There are caused of reasons for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala casting someone into hellfire eternally. Often living hell, not living hell inside of the dunya. There are causes of reasons. The person is bereft of faith inside of their heart. As we read in the hadith, they don't have an atom's weight, a mustard seed of faith inside of their heart, then they're cast into hellfire eternally. Obviously, you can get into other theological issues about whether balugha da'wah, whether the da'wah's reached them or not reached them, the da'wah, whoever has those type of aqwal. But we understand that there are caused of reasons for somebody going to hellfire. Okay, how can we more so say upon that rather than trying to sort of look at sort of esoteric connections between such.
How do we deal with? There's a lot of negative shame, if we can call it shame, Wallahu alam, in the community. It's like a cultural type of thing. So, for example, two boy and girl wanting to get married. Sometimes the parents say you can't get married to him because he's not of our caste. It's like a shameful type of thing. So there's like a negative type of shame sometimes in the community. So how do we deal with that type of attitude?
Allah Ta'ala alam, no doubt that the issue, especially when we get to issues of marriage, that there are always degrees of complexity, because marriage, which is a sort of central institution of the religion in and of itself, which is marriage in and of itself. The Prophet called it half of your religion. It's not something taken lightly from a perspective. And so marriage is about union, okay? And the reality of union doesn't bring about disunion. I think that always must be understood that they're just the greater themes. And so a man and a woman together is not about a man and woman come today, they're in a state of union, but by their union, they become disunion amongst the greater extended family or the community in and of itself. So we always, al-umur, as the first principle of religion, al-umur ala maqasidiha, that things are always carried upon their ultimate objectives in and of themselves. That there is a very, very important thing to take into consideration. But at the same time then, the address then obviously to parents and to extended family and what have you, is the issue of religion over culture. But the point we're saying, the complexity is when there's culture clearly over religion. That's where the complexity comes. But when everybody's aligned on religion, on the principles that the Prophet ﷺ came with, then khalas. It's sort of a straightforward matter. But the issues that we see, cultural issues that we see now, those issues existed in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ, and he broke them. Look, as an example, we meant to say Zainab bin Jahash, radiallahu anha wardaha. She's like, Modesty Qurayshiyya, radiallahu anha wardaha. She's like blue blood, radiallahu anha wardaha, aristocrat. And now the Prophet ﷺ is gonna marry her to Sayyidina Zayd ibn Haritha, radiallahu ta'ala anhu wardaha, Durib bin Riq, who was a slave, had touched slavery, had been touched by slavery. And so here, she has an initial adversity to it. Because that's a cultural adversity. It's from the dictates of culture. But because of a connection to the Rasul and a submission to the word, حَتَّى يُحَكِّمُوكَ فِي مَا شَجَرَ بَيْنَهُم, and until they do not believe, as Allah Ta'ala says, until they render you the judge, the sole judge, in whatever شَجَرَ بَيْنَهُم, in whatever discord, turbulence that they have within them or between them. Hakadha Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala says. And so khalas, the Rasul wanted to get married, she gets married. You can see we're saying Bilal al-Habashi. Hakadha, likewise, Bilal al-Habashi. It wasn't necessarily easy in the beginning of the affair for Sayyidina Bilal to get married because of culture, yani. The issue, once again, slavery, yani, former slave. Sayyidina Bilal. And the parents initially are like, no, this ain't gonna happen. And she's hearing the conversation, folk, radiallahu anha, wardaha, and she says, the Prophet sent you here? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has told for you to marry me? Never going to disobey the word of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. No doubt, that issue, obviously the issue of, of cultural prejudice and racism and what have you. It's of the biggest tawaghit, yani, the biggest things that the ummah in this age has to sort of really put into place, yani. And especially communities that we have inside of this country. Mushkila, yani, problem. That's what Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And a real problem it could be, yani. Allah, the faqir, being in situations with that one, yani, being in situations with people, yani, are often being in situations like our dear teacher Habib Qadim, you've been in situations there, yani, where you're trying to sort of speak to parents and what have you, and you're hearing that 1,000 times over, yani. And at one level, and that's the point, like for example with Habib Qadim, what have you, like you're with the parents, and so you're trying to convince the parents. It's not like just telling the kids, go off, go on, forget your parents, go and do it, and what have you, but it's now trying to go to the parents and convince the parents, yani, that which they're adhering to, really, nas'al Allah salam al-afiyah, yani, that get them in trouble with Allah Ta'ala yawm al-qiyamah, yani. Faqih once, we had a situation, yani, parents weren't having it, yani. They were not having it. Yani. Araftum. Yani, khalas, so it's like, go to the shuyukh. Faqih is telling the individual, you just go to the shuyukh, yani, and see what the shuyukh say. All the shuyukh, the habaib from Habib Umar, quote unquote, on da'was, they're all saying go for it, regardless. Just convince your parents. Tell your parents this is right for you. Have every one of them. And they khalas, araftum. Parents still ain't having it, yani. They're just not having it. Habib Umar even sends like a recorded message. Because you can say, well, Habib didn't say that. So Habib Umar even went as far as like, look, this is my voice saying it, yani. And this has to go ahead. They are not having it, yani. Not having it, yani. It's mudhik, yani. You just think, subhanallah. Subhanallah. I read the sort of faqirs, and then it's in the end, well, what's the faqir going to say? So they want the faqir to go, as if the faqir is going to go against Habib Umar. I don't know where he got that one from, yani. So like the faqir gets in there, and they just ain't having it. The whole family there. Like they weren't even double teaming me. They were like quadruple or quintuple teaming me. And the whole family right there, faqir, like, nah, like watching reasons, yani. But they were just not having it, yani. And subhanallah. Yeah, that was a strange one, yani. That was a strange. And what was even stranger, for the faqir, what was even stranger, yani, for the faqir, like to just like straight talk, yani, it's like the person in question wanted to marry somebody it was a darker skin, yani. Yeah, you could maybe call them black or whatever. He wanted to marry somebody black. And so this family were not having that, yani. And I'm not like looking like, what color am I? You bringing in me to arbitrate here, yani. So I was sort of a bit bewildered by it, yani, like, hey, yani. And after them, they were throwing every excuse under the book, and none of it was happening, yani. None of it. You weren't convinced, yani. They're just not going to have it. That they're mushkila. But, yani, Allah Ta'ala alam, you get the point, Allah alam, you get the point, yani, we always have to be careful, yani. We have to be careful. Yani, Allah alam, we have to be careful. I think it's a really delicate matter. It's not an easy matter, yani. What's most important, rather than, yani, what our parents are saying, really, it's what you're saying. That's the most important issue. Our parents, mashallah, tabarakallah, they've came from wherever they've came. And there are dynamics inside of their life that has brought about their worldview. Araftam, end of story, yani. Araftam, and you have to embrace that to a degree. You have to embrace that to a degree. That's what the faqih was. You have to embrace it to a degree. Tayyib. Now what about you now? You get the point? Because like, yani, quote unquote, came from Etudin to Dan, yani. What goes around comes around. When you're faced with a situation likewise with your own children, what then would you? That's what's most important. We're the ones, quote unquote, that are attaching to the way of Nubuwwah. We're trying to place Allah first. We're trying to place the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam first, aren't we? That's what we're trying to do. To just make sure that's how we rule in terms of in our lives, especially those we quote unquote we have a jurisdiction over. That's what our parents and really whatever. The best you can do there is trying to sort of, really sort of negotiate with them, inshallah, tabarakallah. But I think also, second point, I think is very, very important, really important, and on the parent side of it, like parents are not stupid as it relates to marriage, especially, they're not stupid. We're the ones who really are stupid if the truth actually be known. And you're dealing with your parents who, mashallah, have come from lines upon lines upon lines upon lines of successful marriages, And maybe your parent is speaking to you and they got 30, 40 years behind them, Not just behind them, they can speak about their brother and their sister who've all got this experience of marriage, of what actually makes a marriage work, And you're just going to cast that away? And there's you who never been married, but I love that. I love that. You don't even know what love is, You don't even know what love is. Are often, and that there you have to give deference to it, experience does matter, experience does count, And often it can be as simple as you're going to make a race call, you're going to make a cultural call, you're going to make a profession call, you're going to be thinking it's something as simple as that. Maybe it's not that. And often, Naam.
Sheikh, you said, men's going to get women EA, right? Women here, if they want women, you get another one, so jealous. So how's she's going to cope over there when the men go up to women?
What kind of question, sorry?
Saying that women are jealous in this world.
Don't worry about that. That'll be sorted out in the river of Haya, that river of modesty right there. Sorted out, khalas. That'll be sorted out right there, inshallah ta'ala.
But why are women so jealous in this world? When a man goes for another woman, why do they not approve it?
هكذا طبيعة النساء. It's from the nature of women, That's inside of their nature, But their nature can become distorted when it goes beyond its had, it goes beyond what is correct. It's the quality of ghera. It's the quality of ghera. Ghera which exists as a quality inside of a man and it exists as a quality inside of a woman. Inside of a man, it's not compromised, Ghera mamduh inside of a man. It's mamduh, it's praiseworthy inside of a man. And a man, often, nobody go mess with his woman, That's ghera. A man just allows people to speak to his woman or hakada or what have you. That there, the youth, la yadkhulu jannah, inscribed upon paradise. The youth, the man who lacks ghera will not enter paradise. Not enter, inscribed upon the edifice of Jannah in and of itself. But in a woman, it's something different. She can have it by her tabi'ah. It can be sort of a natural trait that a woman can have, but it has to be tempered. It can't be something that prevents something that Allah Ta'ala not only is sanctioned, or the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam has sanctioned, but it's become part of exemplary conduct in the ummah of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Exemplary conduct. In the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, his people and those who came by. What I mean is the issue of polygyny and having multiple wives. And so when a woman has that ghera, which is preventing something which is exemplary, like saying to Salama had it, that ghera, she says to the Prophet ﷺ, Salama, the Prophet says, as for that, I'll make dua for you that Allah removes it. He tempers it. Hakada. You're not going to leave it. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And so women, part of their journey inside of this world and how they achieve ranks inside of the next world is ensuring, just like men, ensuring that attributes are in accordance with what the Prophet ﷺ brought out. Not in accordance to how, quote unquote, they think they were created. But it's in accordance with what the Prophet ﷺ brought.
Sheikh, you said a woman who's divorced or not married in the next world will be married to the Prophet. Have you got any advice now how we can convince a woman to marry us?
Convince a woman to marry you?
Yeah, because now she's going to stay single to marry the Prophet.
Are women? MashaAllah, MashaAllah. And Allah, there's a woman who wants to stay single just for the Prophet ﷺ. MashaAllah, we should encourage that. All about the faqih, but I'm on his side for that one. And Allah Ta'ala bless and raise her.
So we're just patient then?
Nah, khalas. You know what I mean? Those type of women, from a perspective, are few and far between. Don't worry, they're few and far between.
So with respect to when somebody's trampling over somebody else's rights and they let it go from modesty. If you see like a third person being trampled upon and they're letting it go out of modesty,
No, that's hakada.
but they're letting it go out of modesty, do you still intervene?
No, you can't intervene there. That's the point. Because that's the other rights, okay?
Even if they're letting it go and
Yeah, you can't. If you believe they're being trampled over, people are taking advantage of them. It's not, Now,
Shaykh Affan, how would you help address a lack of confidence in the guise of modesty?
see again?
A lack of confidence, how would you address that in the guise of modesty? And sometimes people are lack confidence, but actually it comes across as modest, but is it modesty in that regard?
Remember, I think it's a simple qaida that modesty, true modesty, it drives you to do good. You see, that's how you understand when something's the illusion, the semblance of something. If that attribute which you believe is a good attribute of religion, a prophetic attribute, if it's not motivating you to do good, not sort of stimulating you to stave off evil or what have you, it's not challenging you to always quote unquote raise your game, your standard in front of the Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's an illusion. Yani. That's what I'm saying, it's an illusion. Okay? That's what's being said there. Huh? And modesty always drives to what is better, yani. Always drives to what is better. Look at the love the Prophet ﷺ had for one of the companions, from Wafd Abdul Qais, which is the Prophet ﷺ called it the greatest delegation. They come to the Prophet ﷺ in the 8th year, the year of Mecca. They come from Eastern Arabia, from what's now modern Ahsa. They come. And so there's a person there whose name is Al-Ashaj, his name is Al-Asri, Al-Asri. And different riwayah, but in one riwayah in Bukhari and others, in one riwayah when the Prophet ﷺ sees him approach, and he comes to the Prophet ﷺ, and then the Prophet asks about him, radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda, and then the Prophet calls him Ashaj, and his name was Mundir. The Prophet says, your name is Ashaj, renamed him, as we said, from the habit of the Prophet ﷺ. But he said, our point is, in you are two qualities that are beloved to Allah Ta'ala and the Rasul ﷺ. Two qualities. And so the Prophet ﷺ in the riwayah, he says, Al-Hilm wal-Ana'a. Another riwayah, he says, Al-Hilm wal-Haya. Another riwayah, Al-Hilm wal-Haya. The Prophet ﷺ says. And so he's here asking the Rasul ﷺ, is this something that is innate inside of me? Or is it something that is from me in and of itself? What it means is from me, it's something that I earn inside of society, that I inculcated inside of myself. And the Prophet ﷺ said, no, it's something that Allah Ta'ala created you upon this type of modesty. But the point being, when you see like Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan, you see like some Ashaj, those ones who the Prophet specifically said have that quality, and to tabu'hum, that you follow them, you'll find that quality always motivates them for that which is higher and higher and higher and higher and higher. You get the point? You're not going to find the illusion of it, yani, often. That's the point, of course. But some people just don't get the hint, yani. Really. And the Prophet left, so when he's leaving the house, and his wife's inside the house, that he would leave, innit? He would leave. And that also is, in a sense, an indicative, like Allah la yastahi, is indicative that they also lack modesty. They also lack modesty, because that's the Prophet's wife. And saying Anas is only young, but it's beautiful in the way they express. Saying Anas, when he says Zainab bin Jahash was inside of the corner, and then he says, Anas, in the tradition, he said that she was extremely beautiful. That's what Sayyidina Anas radiallahu anhu says. So it's the Prophet's wife, and she's extremely beautiful, and there's no coverings, hijab, niqab, sorry. There's none of that, yani. Now you get up and leave. Rasul I'm leaving for you to leave, yani. But obviously they lacked that, or it was the illusion of it, yani.
So he left them alone, so what was, did he just think they were going to leave? Is that why they were...
And of course, that's the you're leaving, Prophet is leaving, in that they'll follow the Prophet with him. And often, or when the Sahib al-Bayt is gone, yani, owner of the house is gone, the man of the house is no longer in the house, even if you're not taking the hint to leave with him, you realize, oh, he's left the house, you'd get up and leave the house of Sahib al-Bayt, yani. And then he comes back, and then you get the point, and all of that, yani.
Sometimes with close companions.
But the beauty of the Sahaba, they're corrected by that. Once Allah Ta'ala reveals, they're corrected by it.
Sometimes with close companions and close friends, the sort of the modesty aspect, there's a bit of a laxity there. Is there some room for that, or should you maintain?
No, there can be an element.
Yeah.
There can be element again, but so long as it doesn't slip into anything that what transgresses the law or transgresses the standards that likewise you've set, yani, for yourself. But yeah, being sort of a bit lighter depending upon people, and mashallah, tabarakallah. That's the tradition of Sayyidina Uthman. Prophet is with Abu Bakr and Umar, and the Prophet then Sayyidina Uthman comes in, and the Prophet starts straightening his clothes up, and Sayyidina Uthman, it's the presence of Uthman. But it shows you the opposite as well. Sayyidina Abu Bakr and Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab, the Prophet is more relaxed, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, with them.
Sheikh, if you have like a guest over at your house and you need to go to like an important appointment or something, and they've just come out the door and they've come in for a while, but you have to go. So who has more rights in that situation? Would the guest have more rights, or would you say, I need to go somewhere to be somewhere?
No, it depends. All depends. It's too general, the actual question. Yeah, it depends. You say it's something important you got to go to?
Yeah, like just an important, not important as in like you've got to be a lesson somewhere, attending like a religious Islamic lesson. So who has more rights in that situation, the guest or you being somewhere, as in like?
Allah, sometimes it could be the guest, sometimes it could be the appointment. It's depending upon you. It's dependent. Any questions, inshallah ta'ala? Any questions? No, good. Inshallah ta'ala, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for tawfiq, inshallah tabarakallah. And for those who it is Eid for them, inshallah ta'ala, Eid Mubarak, min al-Aideen wal-Faizeen wal-Maqbooleen, inshallah tabarakallah. Allah ta'ala allow the sort of beauty of this day return, inshallah ta'ala, time and time again, and that it finds us in a state of obedience to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala, hopefully in a state of increase, as we often hear from our teachers, ليس العيد من لبس الجديد ولكن العيد من طاعته يزيد. That what Eid is not the wearing of new clothes, but Eid is for the one whose obedience increases in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we just inshallah ta'ala pray that as we went into Ramadan, that inshallah ta'ala we came out of it different, inshallah ta'ala, elevated degrees unto Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. And inshallah ta'ala we hope, inshallah tabarakallah, that inshallah ta'ala it's a sort of a new page, inshallah ta'ala, be turned over, inshallah tabarakallah. The age it sort of needs its people, inshallah. It needs people who are firmly committed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And as we've learned, that they place the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam over everything other than them. Jalla Jalaluhu ta'ala azamatuhu sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And so inshallah ta'ala we pray that Allah ta'ala, for all of us inshallah ta'ala, that our prayers have been accepted inshallah ta'ala, and our fasts have been accepted, and our recitation of the Quran has been accepted, and our remembrance of Allah Ta'ala and the salawat upon the Prophet ﷺ has been accepted. And all those deeds, inshallah Ta'ala, even this smiling in our brother's face, inshallah Ta'ala, as an act of sadaqah, as a charity, as he said, that's all been accepted. But once again, as a sign of acceptance, you'll find increase. Okay? Hakada they say, a sign that a deed has been accepted, you find that it's moved into a state of increase with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inshallah ta'ala, in the month of Shawwal, look for increase in prayer. In the month of Shawwal, look for increase in fasting. In the month of Shawwal, look for increase in the recitation of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Zayn al-Quran bi aswatikum, and be of those who inshallah ta'ala quote adorn, as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the Quran with your voices. Although the ulama say in reality it's maqloob, that your voices are being adorned with the Quran in and of itself. We ask Allah Ta'ala for a deeper connection to the book of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, a deeper and more profound connection to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala's book, and a deeper and a more profound connection to the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam through his words and the example that he set for each and every single one of us. And likewise we pray, inshallah Ta'ala, Allah Ta'ala bless those people who Allah Ta'ala has chosen to be responsible for this masjid. And inshallah we thank them for being, mashallah, tabarakallah, beautiful hosts in that regard. And we pray inshallah ta'ala for many of us who have remained inside the masjid for a defined period of time, that inshallah ta'ala is sort of cast a connection inside of our heart between us and the masajid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are those who the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Bukhari and Muslim, said will be what? Beneath the shade of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on a day when there's no shade. رَجُلٌ قَلْبُ مُعَلَّقٌ بِالْمَسَاجِدِ. That a person whose heart mu'allaq, and that's how it should be for all of us, that we leave the mosque but we've left our heart behind. The statement literally means your heart is hung, suspended inside of the mosque. And your heart's always connected to the masjid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May we be from them, mashallah, tabarakallah. Those who connect to the masjid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, أحب البلاد إلى الله, the most beloved of all lands to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, masajiduha, the mosques of Allah Jalla Jalaluhu ta'ala azamatuh. And we can often hear 1,001 excuses about why we don't go to the masjid. The reality, how are you going to fare with that excuse Yawm al-Qiyamah? Maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we hear, لَا تَجْعَلْنَا فِتْنَةً لِلَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. Maybe we can be a fitna that prevents people from approaching Allah Ta'ala, approaching the mosque of Allah Ta'ala, whatever it may be. But that is not an excuse for the people who are prevented in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we hope, inshallah ta'ala, that quote unquote our appetites are wet for being inside of this really, really blessed and important space inside of our community, inshallah tabarakallah. Each and every single one of us, we should try to sort of have this internal motivation, imposition upon ourselves to try to ensure that every single day that we're visiting the masajid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the mosque of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Maybe we're people of Fajr, maybe we're people of what? Of Dhuhr, maybe we're people of Asr. The more the better. But at least every single day, the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How you face Allah ta'ala Yawm al-Qiyamah, where mashallah tabarakallah, that you have been in your house every day, but then you haven't been in Allah ta'ala's house. How are you going to face Allah ta'ala with that? Allah Ta'ala's house, that is greater right, inshallah tabarakallah. Try and take all those great deeds, inshallah ta'ala, that we took from the blessed month in and of itself, inshallah ta'ala, to try to make sure we have a portion of it inside of Shawwal, inside of Dhul Qa'dah, inside of Dhul Hijjah, etc. inshallah tabarakallah. Try to, inshallah, to maintain the brotherhood, inshallah. Maybe there's people that you first met, maybe people that you've known, but you strengthened your bond with them, inshallah ta'ala. That's very, very important. Likewise, as we look at the tradition of mahabba, yuhibbu li akhihi ma yuhibbu li nafsi, li akhihi huwa. That you have a brother fillah, a brother who you love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you should try to strengthen that bond and that tie with those brothers, inshallah tabarakallah. They're the real things that are eternal, baqiyah, inshallah ta'ala, inside of the world to come. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for tawfiq, inshallah tabarakallah. Likewise, those people who are wrestling, inshallah ta'ala, and jiu-jitsu in the morning, hakada, sunnah to Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, keep it up, inshallah tabarakallah. Those who just watching, don't keep it up. Partake, you get involved likewise in the thing that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam himself was actively involved in. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for tawfiq. Those who remaining inside of the masajid, don't forget your small brother here, inshallah ta'ala, and all the others who are alongside you have left. Don't forget them inside of your dua, inshallah tabarakallah. There are people, and mashallah, who have left quote unquote Ramadan behind, both for the wisdom from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that there's some of you still inside of Ramadan. So don't forget those who have left Ramadan behind, inshallah tabarakallah. Keep them inside of your dua, and keep the ummah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam inside of your dua. Difficult time for the ummah of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. It's going to become increasingly more difficult for the ummah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and the du'as are really needed in that regard, inshallah ta'ala. Inshallah musamaha, we seek forgiveness from all of you, inshallah tabarakallah, for all of the multiple deficiencies, the taqsirat that the faqir has, inshallah tabarakallah. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the satar for satar, that Allah ta'ala veils, inshallah tabarakallah, and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for tabdeel, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala replaces deficiencies and sins, inshallah ta'ala, with things that only draw us ever close to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for tawfiq. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Nasheed. He's going to sing a nasheed, inshallah, 2 or 3. 2. Khalas, we'll do masafaha as he's singing the nasheed, inshallah ta'ala. Masafaha, inshallah. You can sing the way well. We'll shake your hands, okay? Just keep singing.
طلع البدر علينا من ثنيات الوداع وجب شكر مجد يا إمام القبلتين طلع البدر علينا من ثنيات الوداع وجب الشكر علينا ما دعا لله داع أيها المبعوث فينا جئت بالأمر المطاع جئت شرفت المدينة مرحبا يا خير داع طلع البدر علينا من ثنيات الوداع وجب الشكر علينا ما دعا لله داع قمر سيدنا النبي قمر وجميل سيدنا النبي وجميل وكف المصطفى كالورد نادي الله الله وعطرها يبقى إذا مست أيادي الله الله وكف المصطفى كالورد نادي وعطرها يبقى إذا مست أيادي وعم نوالها كل العباد وعم نوالها كل العباد وعم نوالها كل العباد حبيب الله يا خير البرى يا قمر قمر سيدنا النبي قمر وجميل سيدنا النبي وجميل ولا ظل له بل كان نورا الله الله تنال الشمس منه والبدور الله الله ولا ظل له بل كان نورا الله الله تنال الشمس منه والبدور الله الله ولم يكن الهدى لولاه نورا ولم يكن الهدى لولاه نورا ولم يكن الهدى لولاه نورا وكل الكون أنارت نوري طه قمر سيدنا النبي قمر وجميل سيدنا النبي وجميل
يا نبي سلام عليك يا رسول سلام عليك يا حبيب سلام عليك صلوات الله عليك يا نبي سلام عليك يا رسول سلام بعد العسر يسرا ربنا علاك قدرا يا إمام الأنبياء أنت في الوجدان حي أنت العينين بي أنت عند الحوض لي أنت هادي وصفي يا حبيبي يا محمد يا نبي سلام عليك يا رسول سلام عليك يا حبيب سلام عليك صلوات الله عليك يرتضي بالحب قلبي حب خير رسل ربي ما به أبصرت دربي يا شفيعي يا رسول الله أيها المختار فينا زادنا الحب حنينا جئتنا بالخير دينا يا ختام المرسلين يا حبيبي يا محمد يا نبي سلام عليك يا رسول سلام عليك يا حبيب سلام عليك صلوات الله عليك سب سے اولا اللہ ہمارا نبی سب سے اولا اللہ ہمارا نبی سب سے بالا ہمارا نبی سب سے اولا ہمارا نبی سب سے اعلیٰ ہمارا نبی سب سے اعلیٰ ہمارا نبی اپنے مولا کا پیارا ہمارا نبی اپنے مولا کا پیارا ہمارا نبی دونوں عالم کا دولا ہمارا نبی سب سے اعلیٰ ہمارا نبی کیا خبر کتنے تارے کھیلے چھپ کے یہ کیا خبر کتنے تارے کھیلے چھپ کے یہ پڑھنا دینا ڈوبا ہمارا نبی سب سے اعلیٰ ہمارا نبی خلق سے